Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure.
Well, hi, and welcome back to another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. I'm Susan Sutherland, and I'm really excited to have our guest today, Pippa Parfait, join us. And before we get to her, I'd like to welcome my compatriot, Juliette Clothier. Juliette, how are you today?
Good, Susan. It's a little early, but I'm great.
For our listeners, it's just after 5 a.m. where Juliette is, and it's mid-afternoon for me and our guest. So sorry for you, but I'm glad you're here.
Me too. I'm excited.
So we happen to be recording this before the Christmas and New Year holidays. And so I'm trying to be mindful not to bring up anything that's really about year end, but it's kind of avoidable. So when you, our listeners, are hearing this, it's going to be in January. But I've been thinking a fair amount, about the year of the snake, which was 2025, and the year of the horse. I don't know if you've been following, Juliette, like on Instagram, there are all these memes about, 2025 was as horrible as it was because it was the year of the snake. And 2026 is going to be amazing because of the year of the horse. All I can say is that I'm going to be stepping into 2026 with the energy of a forward-moving horse, like the Chariot tarot card. Go forth energetically. And anyway, I thought I would share that with you, Juliette, and see what your thoughts are about that.
It's so interesting. I think I've told you this before. The world is scary and crazy as it is now, and I have this mantra of keep it small, bring it in, keep it close. And when I think about 2025 in the small world that I live in, it was a great year. I have a lot of positive things started for me. I did a lot of traveling. I really had a good year. And, as I expand that out further and further and further, there's definitely a lot of things that I would rather did not happen or would like to shed. So I like that. I actually hadn't thought about that at all. And I'm definitely going into 2026 with a lot of energy. I'll have been at my job longer. I'm excited about just settling into the pace of the school year, and also just finishing some of the things that I started in 2025. So I feel the same way about it. I just hadn't put it in a framing like that. So I love it.
Maybe I'm spending more time on Instagram than I should, actually, which is a whole different conversation.
Yeah, it's a whole nother
All right.
podcast.
So with that, I would like to welcome our guest, Pippa Parfait. She is the OG strategist and business coach behind the Disobedient Business Co, which she's been running since 2016. Using her words, she, quote, noped out of the corporate and public sector world and retrained to become a coach, and realized she could bring all her expertise in strategy, systems, and general geekery from her corporate career into her coaching in a way that finally worked for her, unquote. And that really sums Pippa up in so many ways, but let me continue with this introduction. Her eldest kiddo, Lucy, joined the company in 2022, and the two of them share the support of their clients in ways that leverage each of their experience and skills and makes them a powerfully disobedient duo. And I would like to get into what it's like to work with a family member, because I do, but that's, again, for later. Started as a way to support humans for whom the more typical and standard approaches to business, and to be honest, coaching, didn't work, the DBC Co has evolved to explicitly support ADHD and autistic humans in small service-based businesses. Full disclosure, I have been a member of the DBC Co Mastermind program for several years, and have sworn since reaping regular and consistent benefits in working with Pippa, never to run my coaching practice without business support and coaching again. And I have to add, before welcoming Pippa, that one of my favorite things about the DBC Co is that the middle finger is a key part of their branding. Disobedient indeed. So with that, let me welcome you, Pippa. I'm so pleased you're joining us on Secrets of the C-Suite today. Welcome.
Not sure I can follow that. I feel like I should just take a bow and retreat from the room. Thank you very much. It's great. It's great to be here.
It's been a long time coming, and I'm very happy that you're joining us. Lots and lots of questions to ask you, but I would really appreciate it, and our listeners I know would as well, if you could give us a little bit more of a sense of what your background was before 2016 when you retrained as a coach, because you reference corporate and you reference public sector. What were you doing in those years?
Okay, so full disclosure, I am 52 years of age, and I left formal education in the first sense of the word at the age of 16, because I think what my parents and my school would have referred to as a very smart cookie, but the establishment wasn't for me. And 16 to 52, there should have been some clues in there, but apparently there weren't. Apparently I did not see the clues until much later. 'Twas ever thus. So I left school, which is pretty uncommon. I went to a grammar school, which over here is very much kind of private, paid education, the objective of which is really just to get you to pass the right exams to go on to the next level of advanced education and so on. And I really did not fit the kind of, jump through the hoops mentality. Didn't go on to do, I didn't go to university. I didn't go on to do the bridging qualifications in the UK that were what would get you into university. So I got a reasonable gathering of kind of, I suppose, high school qualifications, and then off I went. And the reason I bother to explain that is because my first career was back in the days when it was possible to be recruited on what was kind of a graduate scheme, but for non-graduates into the corporate world. So for the first few years, I trained to be a commercial insurance underwriter. But I don't even know whether Susan knows this about me. I spent until my early 20s doing my, I don't even know whether they still exist, but my Associate of Chartered Insurers Institute exams to be a insurance underwriter. I went through the sort of 16-year-old, 17-year-old. I had the I had the so-called school report, but not from a school, but from a sort of annual review after my first year. My line manager at the time wrote, "Pippa must realise that Rome was not built within one day," which has kind of sponsored the rest of my life, to be quite honest with you. And then I had kids, very young, not intentionally the first time round. Took a bit of a break, did a little bit of education, which is entirely irrelevant to the conversation, and then went back into insurance, into the city. So I worked in London for a few years as a commercial property insurance underwriter. I looked after accounts for people like Hong Kong Shanghai Bank and that kind of stuff. Spent my lunchtime drinking wine with impossibly obtuse men in striped suits down pubs, and then pretended to be able to work for the rest of the afternoon because apparently most people learned that you weren't supposed to drink the wine. Well, I was far too young to really understand that was actually the thing. So therefore was asleep at my desk for most of the afternoon. So the first noping out was leaving working in that kind of arena to work alongside my then partner in tech stuff. So that's where my kind of love of IT, geekery, system structures and that kind of stuff not started, but kind of got given some air. And I spent a number of years, he was an independent network consultant, for want of a better expression, that did sort of installations and stuff. And I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot about tech and systems and so on. But I tended, whereas he was full-blown geek, I tended to lean more in the human side. So I kind of ended up doing training. And then that was the beginning of a sort of 15, 17 year in public sector management, in the sense that I went in initially to become an IT teacher in a further education college. And then after about a year, was asked if I would take on this new weirdly funded online learning initiative that was being rolled out in a kind of regional sub-centres kind of way around the country. I'd been doing that for about, 7 or 8 months. The only centre that was doing it successfully, and somehow, and honest to God, I do not know how this still to this day, how this happened. I went from doing that to being the regional manager of the initiative on behalf of the organisation that had been funded to roll it out in the county in which I worked. And within a year of that was CEO. We'd grown to 25 sessions. I was a member of the board, all public sector funded, all driven by bringing online learning out there and meeting basic training needs of IT, basic skills, literacy, that kind of thing. And then what followed from that was probably I moved down to the South Coast, and so changed careers and just spent a number of years in senior management roles in the leadership team in either government quangos or further education colleges. My last role before I departed, in the nicest possible way, that bullshittery, was as in the senior leadership team in a further education college in Hampshire, in the UK. So it's been a kind of windy road with a little bit of hospitality management thrown in there for a bit of a detour for no real reason other than rebelling against the bureaucracy that was publicly funded education for a bit of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's me.
That's terrific. I've learned a few things today. I did know that there was a zigzaggy journey, and honestly, both Juliet and I have had zigzaggy journeys in some different ways. But I'm really curious whether the pivot, if it was in fact a pivot to coaching, what brought that on? So you have this career in the public sector and you were doing it for a while. You were obviously very successful, very good at what you did. What brought the coaching and the I'm going to run my own business idea to the fore?
That's quite a multifaceted question, if I'm honest with you. Just because the answer is, I have probably from my late teens always had that underlying, I want to be doing this for myself. And that manifested in my dreams and imagination and so on and so forth, in whatever the mood or my particular focus was at the time. So sometimes it would have been a restaurant, other times it would have been a bed and breakfast, a hotel, you name it, a coffee shop with co-working space. I've been there, I've had that idea, and so on. And what always stopped me was the risk stuff. It was the fact that, interestingly enough, I have a ridiculously high risk threshold. Members of my immediate family do not. And as a result, she says subtly, in case members of my immediate family ever listen. And as a result, I had this kind of weird, and this summarizes most of my life, to be honest with you, this weird disconnect between who I truly am at my core, and obviously since finding out that I am autistic, have ADHD, and a lot of which explains a lot of this stuff. And then there's just me, regardless of any of those things. And so I tended to just follow the energy, but that was always quite high risk. So it was always tempered. And so starting my own business, particularly when there was going to be some kind of fairly substantial upfront investment, always felt incredibly high risk. And as a result, I just never braved it. I carried on in my career. I was never in a role for more than, the longest role I was ever in was the one I just mentioned, with the one that I left at the end. And that was only shy of maybe just under 4 years. So I had no hang time, and I had messaging from my childhood that was to do with, you never stick at anything and all of these kind of things, which of course I now understand is I have an interest-based nervous system, which requires me to have variety and change and things. Otherwise I lose interest. I can try to not lose interest all day long, but I do. So I think the whole coaching pivot, in terms of that big change, kind of happened in 2015. And I'll level with you, entirely as a result of trauma. We had a massive thing happen in the family that shook the ground for everybody. Again, won't get into it because not relevant to the story. And it really, it put me on my ass, as I'm sure you can imagine. But it also meant that because of that, my perception of risk, my perception of what's the worst that can happen, well, there you go, was very changed. And I started, and I dropped down to part-time in the role that I had at the time, which was not the corporate role, not the leadership role that I'd already left that, and I'd moved on to sort of doing things. I'd been bimbling around doing various things for a few years while I tried to figure my life out. And of course, this is all coinciding with early perimenopause, so probably not a great surprise in terms of all of that stuff washing around and so on. And wow. I know, right? And I'll level with you. I kind of, I've been a coach in some way, shape or form for most of my career. I've always been, I would never have called it that. And I would never have labeled myself a management coach or an executive coach or anything like that. probably mainly because in the UK that just wasn't really a thing unless you were in the senior echelons of the Big Four or, you know, people like that. But I've been coaching humans in some way for a very long time. And I mean, I'd love this to be a more exciting story, but I stumbled across an advert for the academy that I trained with when I was umming and ahhing about, do I start some kind of virtual assistant business, or do I, you know, what would my in be that would be possible to be able to make some money, to be able to work for myself and then kind of find what it is I want to do. And in doing and in kicking around in some of those spaces for, I don't know, maybe 6 months, I stumbled across an advert for the academy that I did my coaching qualifications with. And within 5 minutes, I'd spent about 5,000 quid and signed up. Now, I don't make those kinds of decisions. I mean, I make very quick decisions normally, but the branding and the vibe around this thing was floral and fancy and fluffy. And I am not floral and fancy and fluffy as a human at all. But it just spoke to me on a level that never had done before. And suddenly I was training to be a coach.
I love this story. I think that, you know, I'm a leader in many I've been a leader in many workplaces over time in lots of different industries. And I'm struck by two different pieces of your story so I'm going to follow up with a question, but I love how your journey seemed like, and I'm going to put a label on it, a lot of things happened by accident. And you took advantage of those kind of happy accidents, or just the journey. You kind of just checked in when something felt right for a minute. But you also listened to yourself, and maybe the voice was so loud you had to get out when you needed to get out. And I think that's something that's very difficult for a lot of people. So I'd love to hear more about that. And then I also would love to see if you have some advice for our listeners about working with neurodivergent workforce, because there is, thank goodness, so much more identification of that within work groups, especially in the 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds that I work with now, and how wonderful it is to have a path and have, I don't want to call it a label, but have something that explains a lot of how your brain works. So that was a long-winded question, but I hope we can pick some pathway out of that.
Julia, in the spirit of ADHD, can you ask me the first one again?
Yes, of course. You ended up in roles by accident, it seems.
Oh, yes.
And can you tell me about just the feeling of getting into something, but then also knowing when it was right time to get out?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, in this conversation, I'm realizing, weirdly for the first time, that I've probably always kind of followed the energy. And I probably wouldn't have used that language 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Pippa was assimilated into the system. This will make Susan laugh like a drain because she knows me very well. But the idea of Pippa being assimilated into the system is just not unconscionable in these days. But I performed life, and I don't think that's necessarily just an autism and ADHD characteristic. It's heightened hugely in those kind of situations. But I think many of us have kind of been, I don't know, I don't really want to use the word indoctrinated, but actually, you know what? It's the right one. We've been indoctrinated by the expectations of society around patriarchy and all of its fun bedfellows, around what we are meant to do, what we're meant to aspire to. And I drank all of that Kool-Aid. And so I performed what Pippa 101 was meant to be for a long, long time, until I didn't. So I think one of the plus sides of I didn't know I was neurodivergent, but I'm looking back now thinking that's what it was, is that whenever I got to a line somewhere, wow, did real Pippa come out? And I'll give you an example of that. So I was in the last senior management, public sector role. We had applied for and been working towards for about 18 months a really high accolade within the sector in terms of accreditation and so on and so forth. And it had been huge and massive and so on. And it was the culmination of a big piece of work. We had the assessment, great, fantastic, had to wait for the answer. And there were two outcomes to the assessment. You could either be accredited with conditions, or you could get an unconditional accreditation. And at that point, nobody else in the country had got an unconditional accreditation because there wasn't the years of data to back it. They hadn't been doing it for long enough. So I got a call from the CEO of the organization that was doing the assessments and what have you one day. And I'd been so unbelievably stressed, this is the relevance to this point, about the outcome and about getting it, and because it had been such a huge thing, that when this guy said to me on the phone, I'm really pleased to let you know that you have been, I won't name the organization obviously, but you've been awarded the first unconditional accreditation. My immediate reaction, because I was unmasked, Pippa was on the set, I went, fuck off, have I? To this guy. It was like management, government quango kind of situation, delivering the great news to a senior leader in another organization. And I dialed it back in pretty quickly. But it was such a shock. Proper Pippa, the Pippa that was supposed to show up to that call, just couldn't bring herself to the front. And all of that kind of follow the energy over the years have been the kind of breadcrumbs, the pathway to, because it wasn't that long after that, probably 6 months that I bailed. And we achieved that. It was great. And then I walked away. And I walked away because bureaucracy, red tape, professional meeting attendee, none of the things that I wanted to be doing with my life was what I was spending my time doing. So I think it's the follow the breadcrumbs. It's when your life or your body or your brain or any other aspects of your human squishiness are giving you the signs. Just, maybe be a bit curious. I'm feeling like I'm being a bit Ted Lasso now, but be curious and ask questions as to what that is telling you rather than just sucking it up and keeping doing what you've always been doing.
I love it. That's so great. That's so great. And my second part of the question was to ask about managing and what you might have done differently or what you might recommend to our listeners about managing neurodivergent workforces.
Yeah, that's quite a big question. So I'm going to be a little bit reductive, if that's okay, because
Please.
I think we could do a podcast series on this, let alone
I would love to.
That's a 2-minute question.
Yeah.
I think the first point would be listen to what people are telling you as a leader, as a manager, as whatever capacity you're in. Listen to what the people are telling you, because there are just not a set of circumstances where they don't know more about what they need and who they are than you do. And, while you're at it, apply that to gender, identity, and all of the other things as well. Secondly, there is no such thing as providing too many accommodations or too many realistic adjustments in someone's work environment. And what I mean by that is that whilst it may or may not feel extreme to you as a manager/leader that this particular person needs to work from home, might well sometimes be working between 5 p.m. and 1 a.m., etc. When you find the right accommodations and adjustments for that human, they will thrive, and therefore so will whatever role it is that they are performing in your business. And every single thing that you ask them to do, or probably more to do with how you ask them to do it or how you ask them to attend or show up, that goes against their natural functioning in the world, not only makes it harder for them, and therefore it's exhausting and all of those things, but also means that the results that they can achieve for you as an organization will be proportionately reduced accordingly.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Pippa, if you would you tell us what led to your diagnoses as ADHD and autistic, and what that journey has been like for you?
Yeah, happily to. I tell you what, it starts with my kids. Because, as I've already mentioned, I'm 52. My generation, which makes me firmly a Gen Xer, God help me, and my generation just didn't see autism or ADHD reflected in identity in any other way than autism was essentially Rain Man. So it, applied to men who were unbelievably socially awkward or rocking in a corner or something of this nature, which, whilst that's entirely one possible representation of autism, it's one of many million. And ADHD being the, disrupted disruptive 17-year-old boy in a classroom. You know, they were, and they're simplistic, and they're also incredibly not typically the representation of ADHD or autism in humans that have been socialized as female growing up. So that was my understanding. And I raised both of whom you know, Susan, but two kids who are now 33 and 28, both of whom are neurodivergent, without that knowledge. So the honest answer is that I didn't start to pull on that thread until both of my kids in some way had also pulled on that thread. And of course, their generation is, you know, my kids are millennial and Gen Z, just either side of, and very much more self-aware in that context than my generation is. Much more educated. Obviously, they spend their times in social media platforms that are absolutely not without their fault and not without their challenges. And, you know, kids out there, not necessarily a great source of data-backed information, but actually they are also an incredibly good source of somebody being able to share their experience in the world for somebody else to be able to see themselves in that experience in the world and to be able to pull on a thread and see whether that is something that is supportive to them. So both of my kids, independently but not independently, as in we all did it in secret, but both of them pursued assessments. One pursued ADHD first, the other one pursued autism first. And the more time I spent around that conversation and unpacking my knowledge of them and my understanding of them, having raised them, and how that could have been different, and the more time I spent unpacking that with my mum, it kind of started me rubbing my, doing the sort of plumber looking at water dripping out of the sink, thinking, I wonder. And then add into that, probably the final clincher was that I'd been coaching since 2016 in some capacity or other. And I'd like to say I woke up one morning. I didn't. It was a gradual thing. But there was a sort of realization point where if I looked at the folks that I was working with one-to-one as a coach, or even in sort of, was I doing anything group? Yeah, even in group capacities, a ridiculously high percentage of people that were working with me were neurodivergent. And they knew they were neurodivergent, or they were in the process of discovering that they were, they were being assessed and so on. And you know that fun phrase of you're the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And we do have a tendency to kind of find each other, like we all do with characteristics in life. It's not just about necessarily being neurodivergent. And so my experience is very much just enough little sparkles kind of going, what about this Pippa and what about that Pippa? And do you see yourself in that? And of course, nobody sits there going, you know what I'll achieve this year? I'm going to decide to be ADHD. I mean, there's so much narrative out there in the world about over diagnosis and all this nonsense at the moment. And it's just not true. Nobody sits out there thinking, you know what would really make my day? I need a neurodevelopmental condition diagnosis. Why would I not want one of those? We're not all sitting there going, yeah, let's go and get one of those because they're trendy. We're seeing ourselves in the way that people are sharing their experience of life and going, oh, yeah, that. And then we go and do endless research and endless reviews and endless questioning and endless reviewing of TikToks and so on and so forth. And then only finally will somebody kind of go, I'm already convinced. I'm going to go and see whether a medical professional agrees with me or not. And that's not to say that self-diagnosis is not valid. Self-diagnosis absolutely is valid. You do not have to go and get some arbitrary psychiatrist's, rubber stamp on your diagnosis. If you truly, I know this is going to sound dismissive, but if you truly have, undoubtedly anyone that believes that they have ADHD truly believes that they have ADHD, has done more work and research and self inquiry than any individual assessment with a one-off psychiatrist is ever going to do in order to be able to put the rubber stamp on there. So my experience has been largely very positive. It's not always the case. And I know a lot of people that have struggled with the kind of transition period from that realization of there's initial kind of euphoria about understanding yourself a bit better, and then quite often quite a prolonged period of grief while you adjust to what that really means, what could have been different, what would have happened if I'd have known this much younger in my life, and so on and so forth. And I think I'm very lucky, and as much as I was so very immersed in that before I ever chose for anybody to rubber stamp something, that it didn't impact me as much as it might have done.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And very insightful about the journey, but also the environment that a lot of people find themselves in, and how we humans navigate that. I'm really curious now to sort of pivot back to your coaching business, because I, as a member of your mastermind, feel like I've been on the front porch of watching your brand, if you will, expand from disobedient, like just kind of people who can't make the world work for them in the best way, and speaking to those people, to now being explicitly also branded as for ADHD and autistic small business owners. Was there a decision, or have I just missed that aspect of the business till now?
Ooh, interesting question. Yeah, of course there was a decision, because that would be a bizarre transition to have taken without actually having had some kind of conversation about it internally. I feel like we have evolved so much over the years. Disobedient Business came out of the anti-status quo, it doesn't fit, I'm not prepared to jump through the hoops of all of the systems and things that exist in the world. And I won't do the detail now because we'll be here all day. And just, I came to realize over the first sort of 2 or 3 years, so Disobedient Business has existed since 2020. It was kind of the big evolution of Lucy and I starting to think together. And we can thank my mum for the name, because we were playing with synonyms and she's the one that came up with disobedient. And I feel like how we've understood our use of the word disobedient has probably changed. You know, we talk about it on the website that says, we feel like we've been disobedient our whole lives. This has just essentially been running against the current, because quite often being neurodivergent feels like you are running against the current, because all of the neurotypical folks are running in the opposite direction. So I think it's an evolution. It's an evolution that's been driven by our community as much as anything else, because as folks continue to come and work with us, the percentage of folks that are neurodivergent is ridiculously high, in a good way. Couldn't be happier. And I think one of the things that's really, really important to say is that when you work very hard to accommodate different people's brains, or be accessible in as many ways as you can possibly be accessible, and I mean that beyond race, gender, ability, and so on and so forth, but accessibility is good for everybody. And the idea that we work in a way that accommodates folks that whose brains could work in all manner of different ways, that's going to be fantastic for neurotypical folks as well. There's just not a set of circumstances where if you happen to be neurotypical in our community, that's not going to be a good thing for you, because obviously we're actually looking to accommodate the whole range of folks and the way the whole range of folks operate. Whereas trying to be a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical space where there is a way and it's my way or the highway, etc., isn't. So, yeah, I'm not so sure that there's a better way of explaining that. I kind of feel like it's just been a gradual evolution, and the sort of most recent launch of the website and things like that maybe have kind of rubber stamped that a bit more because it's put it out there into the world. But it's been an evolution from the folks that show up and the way that we've evolved how we work, rather than necessarily a change in a kind of decisive way, if you like.
Yeah, and I appreciate that nuance, because to me it does feel like it was an evolution. It's just that there's a new website that has slightly different wording than I've seen before. And and of course I only really looked at the website because I was a client before the website came out. Of course. When I was preparing for today's interview. So it was eye-opening in a lot of ways. So sadly, Pippa, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I have one more question to ask, although Juliet might also have one more. In fact, I'm going to ask you, Juliet, to ask your usual question. But first, I would like to say, if you were to give advice to someone about going into business with a family member, and as you know, I work closely with my spouse and I are in a business together. What advice would you give to them?
As you know, I work with two family members.
Yes, and you might want to tread carefully because they might hear this.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I am
talked over you.
two family members. One who is my actual business partner, Lucy, and my youngest runs their own business independently and is also our virtual assistant. So it's not without its challenges. And delineation, I think, to a certain extent, is probably the key. We have separate WhatsApps, for example. All communication for WhatsApp to do with the business goes through our WhatsApp business accounts. We have all manner of family, WhatsApps and so on and so forth, and they are not for business. But I guess just giving each other a lot of grace has probably been the key. It hasn't always been the case. I mean, Lucy and I are quite a few years down the line now, and that dynamic has had to evolve. And that's on both of us. Lucy will bring I'm the child, and so therefore there's that dynamic that's going to come to the table. I will bring I'm the parent and I'm in charge dynamic to the table. We've both had to negotiate that. There've been some key pivot points, like we went on holiday and did quite a lot of business stuff on holiday last April time. And we had some super honest conversations around much like couples therapy. When you say this, the way this makes me feel kind of conversations, which was fun. But yeah, grace is probably the biggest one. I try as a human, let alone as the business partner or mum or anything else for that matter, to come from the place of believing that the other person in whatever interaction I'm in is always doing the best they could possibly have been doing in the circumstances, rather than assuming that they're always doing the worst. And that when someone says something that activates my spidey senses in some way, shape or form, I have fairly acute rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is just taking things that are around rejection and perceived negativity very, very personally. But I have to, I make myself start from that position of that person meant well, but I'm going to say something because I need to clarify it for myself and make sure that we understood each other. But yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think it's brilliant working with family, but it's, it's not without its challenges, but on the whole, I would never change it. Yeah. I love our little business the way it is.
It sounds like you've got a lot of, I call it EQ, really high emotional intelligence. And I think that's one of the keys of working. I also am in business with my sister. And so I think a lot of that is really just remembering that what's the higher goal? What's the higher purpose here? And what am I bringing into the room is so important. And I love that. I think that's a key to a lot of things, a lot of relationships.
And yes, honestly, not just being in business with family, but being in business with anybody.
Exactly.
Colleagues, that grace, that benefit of the doubt is sometimes so hard to find when you've been, let's call it being triggered, or you feel like you've been stepped on. It's hard to then say, okay, I'm pretty sure they're doing their best, so let me come at this with a good open heart. So anyway, Juliet, I did cut you off, and I know you have another question you want to ask before we wrap.
Well, I feel like we've gotten some of the secrets that you've brought into your career and that you have revealed. And I appreciate that so much, but I wonder if you have like one secret that you can share with our listeners that would help them with kind of noticing the signs. I think is what I've taken away from this is that you're a person who's highly intuitive to the signs. And if there's a way that you could share that with our listeners, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, once upon a time, Juliet, that wasn't the case. I don't think I was particularly intuitive to the signs because the power of hindsight is wonderful, isn't it? So I think if I could go back and give kind of 35, 40-year-old, senior leader, relatively young senior leader in the scheme of things, given what I was doing at the time, it would be a person, which is a bit of I'm almost going to make a Grey's Anatomy reference now. I need a person, a kind of someone who is that, whether it's a coach, whether it's a peer, whether it's just a pal, because sometimes in order to access the weird cognitive dissonance that's going on, which is when you are behaving in a certain way and feeling in another way, and it just feels janky, but you can't place like where it is, you know, because there's very minimal of us that kind of can access that whole, where does that fit in your body? What color is it? And I'm not knocking those kind of things, but like, seriously, it's a little bit, you know, out there for a lot of us. So having someone that you can have a conversation with where they can ask you questions to help you kind of tap into whatever that thing is that is that little sign. I think if I could go back and give 35, 40-year-old Pippa that person, I would, because I didn't. I had that stand alone, do everything by myself. I am an island. It is amazing. Look at how independently incredibly clever and talented I am, whilst also believing that I am useless, that I'm going to get found out all the time in 5 minutes time, and so on. And what would have helped immensely is having a person to pick through those things with me.
I love that. That is great advice. And I think all three of us have learned that over time in finding that coach, finding that channel, a place where you can be completely honest and authentic. And that will lead to discovery. And I just think that's fantastic. And on that note, I'm going to thank our guest, Pippa Parfait. This has been such a great conversation. I appreciate you so much. And I also want to say thank you to our listeners. Thank you, Susan. See you in a couple weeks.
We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier, and the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.